So, I want you to just imagine for a second that you've built this entire life around doing everything, like exactly right.
Right. Playing totally by the rules.
Exactly. You put yourself through college, navigating all those financial hurdles, the social hurdles, and you work this incredibly demanding job.
Yeah. Labor and delivery nurse, which is just,
Oh, it's physically and emotionally exhausting. And you do this for 20 straight years.
wow.
You never falter, you never slip up once. And on top of that, you raise a son entirely by yourself.
And he's not just, an okay kid.
No, he's a National Merit Scholar. He's this honors student who, like, opens doors for elderly neighbors, says please and thank you. He irons his own shirts.
A literal picture of perfection.
Right. You buy the neat little house in a safe neighborhood, keep your car spotless, pay your taxes. You build this, I mean, it's basically an impenetrable fortress of merit.
A resume of pure excellence.
Yes, a totally undeniable resume. And then one day at work, you walk up to a patient's medical file, and there is a single small piece of paper attached to it. Just a pink Post-it note.
A sticky note.
Yeah. And in the space of a heartbeat, that tiny piece of office stationery completely, utterly unravels your entire 20-year fortress.
It's a profoundly terrifying premise when you really think about it.
It really
The
is.
sheer fragility of it,
Yeah.
the idea that all this armor you've painstakingly built to protect yourself and your family and your livelihood, it can just be bypassed by something as mundane as a brightly colored sticky note.
Well, today we are going into a deep dive on Jodi Picoult's novel, Small Great Things. And we're going to figure out exactly how a 20-year career can be dismantled by that single piece of paper.
And what that reveals about the invisible, honestly, often dangerous systems we all walk through every single day.
Right. Our mission today is to unpack these deeply woven, overlapping narratives in the book. We're talking race, privilege, the justice system, and, frankly, the fierce protective nature of motherhood.
Yeah, but right at the top, I think we need to explicitly set some parameters for you, the listener.
Definitely.
The source material we are examining today tackles highly politically charged themes. It deals head-on with concepts of systemic racism, implicit bias, and white supremacy.
Heavy stuff.
Very heavy. So we need to be clear, our goal in this discussion is not to take a political side.
Right, not at all.
We're not here to endorse any specific viewpoint presented in the real world or by the author. Our job today is to impartially report and explore how these ideas, these profound conflicts, are constructed within the original text.
Exactly. We're looking strictly at the mechanics of the narrative and the sociological theories the author uses to build this fictional world.
We're basically treating the book as a mirror.
Yeah, exploring the reflection it offers. Because fiction has this unique ability to serve as a safe testing ground for really volatile realities. It lets us look at things that are super uncomfortable to talk about in our daily lives.
Which is why we're going to focus on the three central pillars that hold this whole narrative up.
Right. So first, we have Ruth Jefferson. She's the veteran African-American labor and delivery nurse who built that fortress of a life we just talked about.
Then second, we have Kennedy McQuarrie. She is a white, deeply idealistic public defender.
And third, we have Turk Bauer. He is a white supremacist, and he is a grieving father.
The entire architecture of this novel relies on forcing these three very distinct perspectives into this devastating collision.
But before we can even begin to understand the explosion of that collision, we kind of have to understand the environment it happens in, right?
Yeah, we have to look at the foundational concept the author explicitly bases this whole book on, the invisible systems operating in our everyday lives.
And the text grounds this in a very specific theory. Like in the author's note, Jodi Picoult credits this social justice educator, Peggy McIntosh.
Right, with the concept of the invisible knapsack.
The invisible knapsack. It's basically a metaphor for this set of unearned, often completely unacknowledged advantages that certain people just carry around with them.
Simply because of the societal default of their race.
Exactly. And the text gives these highly specific everyday examples of what is actually inside this knapsack.
Which I think helps move the concept from just like abstract academic theory into a lived reality that the listener can visualize.
Totally. So, for instance, the book talks about the ability to walk into any random hair salon in any town and just easily find someone who has been trained to cut your hair texture.
Right, or the ability to go to a mainstream toy store and effortlessly buy dolls or action figures or children's books that feature people of your own race as the heroes.
Yeah, or moving into the professional sphere, which is super relevant here, it's the ability to get a promotion at your job without any of your colleagues quietly suspecting that it was just due to a diversity quota.
Without them whispering that you didn't earn it with your own skill.
But see, here's where I get stuck, and where I think a lot of people listening might push back a little.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I am Ruth, right, and I have spent my whole life working incredibly hard to achieve something. I'm working these agonizing night shifts, studying until my eyes bleed.
Sacrificing everything for your kid.
Sacrificing my own comfort to get my son into honors classes. Hearing that my success is partly due to an invisible knapsack or environmental wins would feel, it would feel incredibly dismissive.
Yeah, it would.
If you have fought for every single inch of ground, how does the book reconcile the reality of pure, exhausting hard work with this concept of systemic advantage or disadvantage?
Well, that is the exact psychological friction the book explores through Ruth's character.
Really?
Yeah, because at the beginning of the novel, Ruth completely rejects the concept of the knapsack.
Oh, she doesn't buy into it at all.
Not at all. She doesn't believe in systemic headwinds or tailwinds. She believes in pure, absolute meritocracy.
Interesting.
She believes that excellence is a shield. Because, think about it, no one wants to feel like their accomplishments are just the result of favorable conditions.
Right. You want to own your success.
And conversely, no one who has achieved success wants to be told that the system is rigged against them, because that implies their position is precarious.
That makes total sense. And Ruth has the receipts to back up her belief, honestly. She has 20 years of exemplary, flawless experience at Mercy West Haven Hospital.
But to really understand her profound faith in meritocracy, we have to look at how she constantly contrasts her own life with her mother's life.
Right. So Ruth's mother was a domestic worker. She basically spent her entire life serving this famously wealthy NBC television executive named Sam Hallowell.
So Ruth grew up watching her mother wear a uniform, cleaning up after this incredibly privileged family in their massive New York City brownstone.
And because of that stark contrast, Ruth pushes her son, Edison, just relentlessly. She views education and polite assimilation as the ultimate equalizers.
She fundamentally believes that if Edison just works hard enough, if he speaks perfectly, if he gets enough academic accolades, the world will have no choice but to grant him an equal place.
Right, and there is this incredible childhood story that Ruth recounts in the text that acts as the absolute bedrock for this entire worldview.
The Blizzard story.
The Blizzard story. So it takes place in 1976. There is this massive city-stopping snowstorm in New York. School is canceled.
Right, so young Ruth and her sister Rachel have to go to work with their mom.
They have to go to the Hallowell's brownstone, and they have to enter through the side door, passing these imposing, terrifying gargoyles.
Which is a detail that sticks with them.
Definitely. And while they are trapped there by this blizzard, the Hallowell mother, Mrs. Mina, suddenly goes into early labor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the ambulance cannot navigate the snowed-in streets. The wealthy family is entirely cut off from all their fancy medical resources.
So Ruth's mother, the domestic worker, wearing her white apron, she steps up.
She takes total control of the situation, and she delivers the baby, Louis, right there in this opulent master bedroom.
And Ruth watches this happen. And she actually calls it a miracle.
Right. But the miracle in her eyes wasn't just the successful birth of a baby in a blizzard.
No, it was the social shift.
Exactly. Ruth says that for one heartbeat, for one single breath in that room, all the stratified differences in schooling, in money, in social class, and skin color, they completely evaporated.
It was just one woman desperately in pain and another woman possessing the specific knowledge to help her.
Pure equality. And Ruth says she spent 39 years waiting to see that exact miracle happen again.
The mechanics of that memory are so crucial to the text. Ruth's proximity to wealth, through her mother's employer and her own subsequent academic and professional achievements, they created a protective bubble around her.
Because they helped her out, right?
Yeah, the text notes that the Hallowell family even paid for her mother's hip replacement. And Sam Hallowell later tells Ruth that she is not an imposter in her prestigious nursing college. He assures her she earned her place.
So because of this benevolent paternalism from the wealthy family and her own undeniable grit, Ruth firmly believes she had outrun the systemic issues.
The same issues that her sister, Rachel, recognized and actively fought against.
Right. Rachel was the sister who was furious about having to enter through the side door past the gargoyles. Rachel saw the system.
But Ruth believed she could just build her own front door if she worked hard enough.
To establish just how hard Ruth works, though, and to prove that her belief in her own excellence isn't just like arrogance, the author provides this devastating illustrative anecdote early in the text.
Yeah, the scene with the anencephalic baby.
The scene is harrowing, but it does exactly what you're saying. It proves Ruth's absolute mastery of her profession.
Set it up for us.
So Ruth is assigned to a patient who delivers a baby boy, Ian. But Ian is born with profound, fatal birth defects. The text describes the infant as being born without a face. The condition is completely incompatible with life. And there's this young nursing student in the room who is so shocked she actually screams and calls the baby a monster.
Which immediately shifts the psychological dynamic in that delivery room.
Totally. Ruth shoves the panicked student right out of the room. She calmly cleans the baby, swaddles him meticulously, and places him with his mother.
And the mother looks at him with this fierce, agonizing love.
But the father completely shatters. He panics, he bolts from the room, and he yells, "That's not my son."
And Ruth doesn't just let him run away.
No, she follows him right out of the room. She corners this terrified, grieving man in the hospital lounge, and she essentially forces him to go back in and hold his dying child.
Because her internal rationale for this is so revealing. She knows that her job isn't just physical medicine.
It's psychological triage.
Yes. She knows that if this father doesn't acknowledge that this horrible thing has happened, if he is allowed to pretend it never did, a hole will open up inside his psyche.
A hollow pit that will just grow over the years until he is completely empty.
So she makes him face the absolute deepest pain imaginable. They sit there and hold the baby for 10 hours until he passes peacefully.
It perfectly establishes the mechanics of Ruth's character. She possesses this deep, almost aggressive empathy.
An unwavering moral compass.
She is not just capable, she is a master of the human condition within the walls of that hospital.
Which is precisely what makes the catalyst of this novel so utterly shattering.
Yeah. We move from Ruth's hard-earned illusion of safety and unquestionable authority right into an event that proves how quickly bias can dictate both medical and legal outcomes.
Enter Turk and Britt Bauer.
Right. They are a young couple arriving at Mercy West Haven to have their first baby.
And the author makes their worldview immediately, visually clear. Turk has specific tattoos, and they vocalize their beliefs openly. They are active white supremacists.
Yeah. And after Britt gives birth to a boy named Davis, Turk notices Ruth interacting with his child. He immediately goes to the nurse supervisor, Marie, and makes a highly specific demand regarding the staffing of his wife's room.
And this demand results in the inciting incident of the entire book.
That pink Post-it note.
Right. Marie, the supervisor, takes a sticky note and places it directly on baby Davis Bauer's physical medical file.
And it reads, in all caps, "No African-American personnel to care for this patient."
We really have to analyze the administrative mechanics of this moment, because the hospital's complicity here is staggering.
It really is. Marie is supposed to be Ruth's friend. The text notes they've actually gone on spa weekends together.
But Marie complies with the parents' racist demand anyway. She reassigns Ruth, physically segregating the ward just to appease a patient.
But why does she do that? Like, how does a modern medical facility justify that kind of action?
It basically comes down to institutional priority masquerading as conflict resolution.
Oh, interesting.
The hospital represented by Marie in this moment prioritizes its own liability, its fear of making a scene, and the comfort of its racist patients over the basic civil rights and human dignity of its veteran employee.
So it is the customer service model applied to healthcare.
Taken to a grotesque extreme.
It is the ultimate betrayal of the meritocracy Ruth believed in. Her 20 years of flawless service, her ability to guide families through unimaginable grief, like with baby Ian, all of it meant absolutely nothing against a single hateful demand.
The betrayal is profound, but the tragedy accelerates rapidly from there because a medical emergency happens.
Yeah. Through a series of, typical hospital phenomena, staffing shortages, people stepping out for lunch, sheer coincidence, Ruth is left alone in the nursery with baby Davis.
And suddenly, the baby stops breathing. He goes into severe respiratory distress.
And here is where the author places Ruth in this impossible, agonizing paradox. Ruth is completely paralyzed.
She has two conflicting directives screaming in her head at the exact same time.
Right. Her instinct as a nurse, her fundamental human decency, and her medical oath demand that she intervene to save this dying infant.
But her explicit written orders from her supervisor, which are literally stuck to the child's file, tell her not to touch him.
She is terrified that if she violates that order, she will lose her job, her pension, and her ability to provide for Edison.
Her entire identity, that fortress she spent 20 years building, is suddenly on the line.
So she hesitates. And in a neonatal medical emergency, hesitation is fatal. The clock ticks down. She eventually breaks through the fear. She begins CPR, but it is simply too late. The baby dies.
And the aftermath is apocalyptic for Ruth.
She is charged with murder. Her nursing license is suspended. This woman with a pristine 20-year career is suddenly working the cash register at a fast food restaurant just to buy groceries for her honors student son.
If we break down the legal and HR mechanics of that paradox, the deep injustice of it becomes glaringly apparent. Ruth is punished by the legal system for hesitating to act.
Even though she was explicitly ordered by her employer not to act.
Exactly. And later in the text, Kennedy, the public defender, uncovers how the hospital's HR representative, Jack Donardi, essentially engineered Ruth's downfall.
Oh, Jack Donardi. He was brutal.
The hospital needed a scapegoat to protect the institution from a massive multi-million-dollar negligence lawsuit by the Bowers. So they sacrificed the very nurse they had marginalized in the first place.
There's an analogy used in the book that perfectly captures the psychological weight of this fallout. The kangaroo suite.
Yes.
It's a literal term for the bereavement room in a hospital where parents can hold their stillborn or deceased babies, keeping them close to the skin. But the analogy extends way beyond the physical room.
Right. It's about what you carry.
Yeah, the idea is that even when you no longer have a child, you carry them forever, like a kangaroo carries a joey in its pouch. You carry the weight, the grief, the phantom presence of what you lost.
How does the text apply that concept to the characters in the wake of the baby's death?
Well, it applies to Turk in a very literal sense. The author is careful to impartially report that Turk's grief over his son is genuine, raw, and bottomless.
He's looked at his baby, promised to protect him from the world forever, and he failed.
He is carrying that dead child in his own psychological kangaroo suite, and that grief mutates into a demand for absolute vengeance.
But it applies to Ruth, too, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. She is carrying the crushing, suffocating fear of losing her ability to protect Edison. Her son is alive, but she feels she is failing him because her ability to mother him the way she wants to provide for him, to be a role model of success, has been completely stripped away by the state.
She is grieving the death of the life she built.
It is a brilliant emotional parallel. The tragedy forces both of them into a corner. And for anyone listening to this, I mean, just consider the workplace dynamic that initiated all of this.
Right. How would you react if your employer validated a client's blatant discrimination against you?
If your boss prioritized avoiding a difficult conversation over your basic human rights, and then when a crisis occurred precisely because of that discrimination, the institution blamed you to save itself.
It is a catastrophic systemic failure that is just masquerading as an individual error.
So the hospital washes its hands of her. Turk is demanding blood. And the fallout moves entirely from the hospital floor into the courtroom.
Which brings us to the legal strategy. This is where the ideological battle of the book takes center stage.
We are looking at a battle between colorblind jurisprudence and what the book calls the peanut butter and jelly.
So let's introduce Kennedy McQuarrie. She is a public defender who took a massive pay cut to do this job because she genuinely believes in the ideals of justice.
But Kennedy has a very specific philosophy on how to win cases in front of a jury.
She believes the only way to get an acquittal for Ruth is to leave race completely out of the courtroom. She wants to present a colorblind defense, focusing entirely on medical facts, timelines, and reasonable doubt.
Okay, let's talk about the legal theory behind that. Why do defense attorneys do this? Why would Kennedy look at a case that literally started with a racist Post-it note and decide that race shouldn't be mentioned?
Because defense attorneys know that juries are incredibly unpredictable. And injecting systemic racism into a trial shifts the burden from proving facts to changing minds.
Oh, and changing minds is way harder.
Much harder. Kennedy knows that if she brings up race, she risks alienating the jury. She fears the prosecution will frame Ruth as an angry, vengeful employee playing the race card to cover up a medical mistake, rather than presenting her as a dedicated nurse caught in a systemic trap.
Right.
Kennedy's goal is not to solve society's ills. Her goal is to keep her client out of a concrete cell.
So Kennedy goes digging for a medical off-ramp. And through a neonatologist friend named Ivan Kelly Garcia, she finds a massive structural flaw in the medical narrative.
She uncovers a chain of systemic failures that had absolutely nothing to do with Ruth.
What does Ivan find?
Well, He reviews the infant's records and finds a critical gap in the newborn screening process. He realizes that because the state lab is closed on weekends, baby Davis's metabolic test results were severely delayed.
And those results were the key to everything. They showed that baby Davis was positive for MCAD.
Let's explain the biological mechanism of that for a second. MCAD is a potentially fatal metabolic disorder.
It means the infant's body basically lacks the enzyme needed to break down certain fats into energy.
If a baby with MCAD goes too long without eating, their blood sugar plummets, they can become lethargic, have seizures, and literally crash and die.
And because the State Health Laboratory operates on standard business hours while human biology operates around the clock, the hospital didn't know the baby had this condition until it was too late.
Exactly. Kennedy also explores a secondary defense strategy involving the sickle cell anemia trait.
And the sociological implications of that are wild. Sickle cell trait is predominantly, though not exclusively, found in people of African descent.
So Kennedy is looking into weaponizing a racially associated medical trait to build a wall of alternate medical explanations for the death.
All while demanding that the trial itself remain entirely race-blind. She wants to use the biology of race to win while ignoring the sociology of race that put Ruth on trial in the first place.
It perfectly highlights the profound disconnect between legal strategy and lived reality. Kennedy believes this medical evidence is the winning ticket. It's pure science. No emotion, no racial tension, just a tragic biological anomaly.
But Ruth completely rejects this strategy. She fights Kennedy on it tooth and nail, because Ruth wants to tell her story.
She doesn't want to hide behind a delayed lab result or a metabolic disorder.
No, she wants to sit on the witness stand, look the jury right in the eye, and force them to hear that she was targeted, marginalized, and put in an impossible situation specifically because of the color of her skin.
And this argument between them leads to one of the most powerful and accessible analogies in the text, the peanut butter and jelly analogy.
It's so brilliant in its simplicity. So Ruth is sitting at her kitchen table with Kennedy, trying to explain why the colorblind defense is just a fiction.
Yeah.
She explains that when Edison was little, he was a very picky eater. Sometimes she'd make him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch, and he'd suddenly decide he didn't want the jelly anymore.
So Ruth would take a butter knife and try to scrape the jelly off the bread.
Right, but if you understand the mechanics of making a sandwich, you know you can't ever really scrape the jelly off.
The fruit juice soaks deep into the porous bread.
Even if you remove the physical bulk of the jelly, the bread remains stained red or purple. You can still smell it. You can still taste the sweetness. The bread has been fundamentally altered by its contact with the jelly.
And Ruth looks at her lawyer and says, race is the jelly.
You cannot take a legal knife, scrape it out of this trial, and pretend the bread is plain. The entire situation, the racist parents, the supervisor's post-it note, the hospital's panicked reaction, the severe charges brought against her by the prosecutor, all of it is soaked in it.
If you try to present this case without mentioning race, you're presenting a sanitized, entirely false version of reality.
The text forces us to grapple with the ethics of this legal approach. Like, is Kennedy's colorblind strategy a brilliant, pragmatic necessity to save a woman from prison? Or is it simply Kennedy's own privilege, her own invisible knapsack, allowing her the comfort of looking away from a harsh reality that Ruth is forced to live every single day?
That is the core friction between them. Kennedy views the court as a chessboard. You move the pieces to get the not guilty verdict.
But Ruth views the trial as a platform for her humanity. She is willing to risk a conviction. She is actually willing to risk serving time in a state penitentiary just to have her experience validated on the public record.
The novel portrays the American legal system not as a venue for absolute truth, but as an arena for competing narratives. The prosecution constructs a narrative. An angry, vindictive nurse intentionally let a baby die out of spite.
Kennedy constructs a counter-narrative. A tragic medical anomaly caused an unpreventable death.
But neither of those narratives represents the actual truth of what Ruth experienced in that nursery.
No, the justice system demands that Ruth carve away the most defining aspect of the event just to fit into a legally digestible, palatable box.
It's infuriating. And while this intense ideological battle is raging in the courtroom, the rest of the world hasn't stopped spinning.
Right. A crisis like this doesn't stay neatly contained within legal briefs. It bleeds out into the lives of everyone surrounding the epicenter.
Which brings us to the ripple effects of the tragedy, specifically focusing on how it impacts the men in the story, Edison and Turk.
Let's examine Edison's character arc first, because it is a profound tragedy of shattered innocence. As we established, he starts the novel as the golden boy. the National Merit Scholar.
The kid who genuinely believes, just like his mother taught him, that if he plays by the rules and assimilates perfectly, he will win the game.
But watching his mother, the woman who played by the rules better than anyone on Earth, get arrested, lose her prestigious job, and be publicly vilified, completely shatters his cognitive schema.
He experiences a radical awakening.
He realizes that his honors classes, his iron shirts, and his polite manners do not act as a shield against a society that views him with suspicion.
The text illustrates this awakening through a powerful moment where Edison challenges Ruth's understanding of history. He points out the mechanics of how history is taught in his school, noting that Black history is treated as a mere footnote to the main narrative.
And he specifically cites the historical figure Lewis Latimer.
Lewis Latimer is such a perfect example for this.
He really is. Edison points out to his mother that Latimer actually drafted the patent drawings for Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, and he worked as a vital draftsman for Thomas Edison, the man Ruth literally named her son after.
But nobody knows Latimer's name.
Edison tells his mother that the only time people who look like them make history, it's relegated to a sidebar or a designated month, while the main text belongs exclusively to others.
Edison is waking up to the systemic nature of the inequality that Ruth tried so desperately to protect him from.
And on the other side of this tragedy, the text forces us to look at the mechanics of Turk Bauer's radicalization. As we stated at the beginning, the author does not portray Turk as a two-dimensional cartoon villain.
No, she portrays him as a complex human being experiencing profound grief, who simultaneously holds abhorrent, violent beliefs.
The book dives deeply into his background to explain how he became who he is. We learn how he was groomed into the white supremacist movement.
He met his wife, Britt, through her father, Francis Misham.
Turk was a vulnerable, angry young man who lacked direction, and he found a sense of belonging, brotherhood, and a twisted sense of power within this community of hate.
The text explores the pipeline of radicalization, how hate is taught, nurtured, and weaponized by older figures looking for foot soldiers.
But the author juxtaposes his radical extremism with his genuine love for his son. When Turk holds his newborn, Davis, and promises to protect him from the world, it echoes the exact same fierce parental devotion Ruth feels for Edison.
By making Turk's grief undeniably real and universally recognizable to any parent, the text makes the situation infinitely more complex than a simple binary of good versus evil.
It forces everyone involved to realize a terrifying truth about how prejudice operates. Bias isn't just about the active, screaming hatred of someone like Turk. That's the easy kind to spot. It wears tattoos and yells slurs.
The more insidious kind is the passive compliance of the hospital.
Yeah, Marie hanging up that Post-it note just to keep the peace and avoid an awkward conversation. Or the well-meaning ignorance of Kennedy, who thinks she can just pretend race doesn't exist to win a court case.
The underlying argument of the text is that the active hate of the few is entirely enabled by the passive comfort of the many.
And there's a really subtle, brilliant scene the author uses to show how deeply ingrained this passive thinking is, right from childhood. It involves Kennedy's 4-year-old daughter, Violet.
Oh, this is a perfect example of how cognitive schemas are formed.
Exactly. So Edison is over at Kennedy's house, and he's sitting on the living room floor coloring with little Violet. Edison has a children's coloring book, and he's coloring Cinderella's dress green.
And Violet, this tiny 4-year-old girl, gets incredibly upset.
She insists with absolute unshakable certainty that Cinderella's dress must be blue. And when asked why, her answer is simply, because that's the way it is in the book.
Violet isn't being malicious. She's just repeating the reality she has been handed. She has been taught to see the world within strict, predefined lines.
A princess dresses blue. A doctor looks a certain way. A criminal looks a certain way.
And when someone like Edison comes along and colors outside those lines, when he imagines a different reality or disrupts the expected pattern, it causes immediate friction.
It shows how incredibly hard it is to unlearn the scripts we are given from the moment we are born, because those scripts feel like absolute truths to us.
This clash of realities where Edison sees a world that refuses to validate him, and Turk sees a world he must violently protect his son from, and Violet sees a world that must remain exactly as it is in the picture book. It brings us to the author's own struggle.
Jodi Picoult isn't just writing this narrative in a vacuum. She is actively trying to reconcile these viewpoints as a white author exploring systemic racism.
Which brings us to the author's intent. Why did Jodi Picoult construct this specific, painful narrative?
In her author's note, she lays out the initial spark for this book, and it came from a horrific real-life event. She read a news story about a Black undercover police officer in New York City.
This officer was working a dangerous sting operation. To ensure his fellow uniformed officers knew he was on their side, he was wearing what was called the color of the day wristband.
It was a visual password, a standardized police protocol designed to prevent friendly fire.
But the mechanics of that visual password failed entirely. Despite wearing the designated wristband, the undercover officer was shot multiple times by his white colleagues.
The wristband was supposed to be his absolute shield, much like Ruth's 20 years of flawless nursing experience or Edison's National Merit Scholarship.
But in the heat of the moment, the implicit bias of the responding officers completely overrode the visual evidence of the wristband.
The system they all relied on failed him. Picoult was struck by this breakdown in logic and wanted to explore the mechanisms behind how a trusted system can fail someone simply because of the way they look.
This exploration leads to the title of the book itself, Small Great Things. It originates from a quote attributed to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. "If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way."
Picoult admits that she wrestled with writing this book at all. She acknowledges her own status as a white woman writing about the Black experience in America, and she expects heavy pushback from all sides.
She anticipates white readers being angry at being called out on implicit bias, and she expects readers of color to question whether this was her story to tell in the first place.
She explicitly states that she is a work in progress regarding her own racial awareness.
But she uses the MLK quote to anchor the ultimate message of the narrative. The text argues that while individual changes cannot entirely eradicate racism overnight because massive institutional systems require structural legislative overhauling, it is precisely through small acts that these systems are both perpetuated and dismantled.
Marie putting up the Post-it note was a small thing that perpetuated a racist system. Kennedy choosing to finally listen to Ruth's lived experience rather than just legally managing her is a small thing that begins to dismantle it.
But let's look at that critically for a second.
Okay.
Does focusing on small things like examining our own personal biases or having a difficult conversation with a family member, does that let society off the hook for fixing the massive systemic issues?
Right. If we just focus on our own invisible knapsacks, are we ignoring the factory that is mass-producing the knapsacks in the first place?
It's a vital question. The author addresses this by incorporating a concept from writer Roxana Robinson, the metaphor of the tuning fork.
I love this metaphor.
Robinson suggests that a writer is like a tuning fork. When struck by an idea, the writer transmits a strong, pure note that passes through the reader.
The goal of this book isn't to provide a neat, happy ending where structural racism is solved by a single court case.
The goal is to be that tuning fork, to strike a note so pure and so uncomfortable that it forces the reader to vibrate with it, to have the difficult conversations they've been actively avoiding.
The macro systems, the hospitals, the courts, the police departments are entirely made up of human beings making millions of small individual choices. You cannot change the factory without changing the choices of the people operating the machinery.
The big things are entirely reliant on the small things.
We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at Ruth's absolute, unwavering faith in a meritocracy, the belief that her scrubs, her degree, and her flawless record protected her from the winds of bias.
We examined the agonizing tragedy in the nursery, where an impossible paradox of conflicting orders and medical oaths led to the death of baby Davis.
We analyzed the fierce, deeply philosophical courtroom battle, not just over guilt or innocence, but over whose narrative was legally allowed to be spoken aloud.
We saw how this trauma radicalized Edison, shattered Kennedy's comfortable worldview, and explored the deep pipeline of Turk's violent grief.
The narrative ultimately demands that you, as the observer, look at the evidence presented not just in the trial of Ruth Jefferson, but in the trial of the society that constructed the rules of her life.
It demands that you open your own invisible knapsack and take a rigorous, honest inventory of what you find inside.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into small great things, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. It's a concept introduced late in the source material, a metaphor that perfectly encapsulates the psychological toll of assimilation.
What is the metaphor?
The text poses a question about the very nature of belonging. It asks, what if the puzzle of the world was a shape that you simply didn't fit into?
Okay.
And the only way to survive, the only way to keep your job, your freedom, or your life was to mutilate yourself, to carve away your own corners, to violently sand yourself down, to modify your very being just to fit into the specific space society provided for you.
It is a haunting image. The invisible violence of having to constantly sand yourself down just to exist in public.
It is. So as you go about your day-to-day, as you go to your workplace, as you navigate your neighborhood, as you interact with the complex systems all around you, I want you to think about that puzzle.
Yeah.
And I want you to ask yourself, who in our society is being forced to carve away their corners just to survive the day? And what small things can we do to finally change the shape of the puzzle?